All About Writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 30, part 6 on our series on the business of writing. I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning, best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter.
And I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning, best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher. And that last bit is actually the most important part today, just by chance, because we are going to be tackling the topics of traditional versus self-publishing. The pros, the cons, the ins, the outs. And Ben has a wonderful wealth of knowledge about both sides of this from the side of the publisher. I mean, we're both authors. We have done traditional big five presses. We have done self-publishing and also small and mid-sized press publishing and interacted with the publishing world from that aspect. But I think what people are really going to want to know is from the point of a publisher, what exactly, what are the pros? What are the cons? What should people be thinking about when they're even making the decision of if they're going to want to pursue one or the other? And my biggest question is, if you start with one, are you stuck there for the rest of your publishing career? Or is there a detriment to switching gears halfway through your publishing, journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that question I can answer pretty quickly.
Good.
The good
Thanks.
news is no, you are not stuck in one or the other. Years ago, it used to be. That was back when self-publishing didn't have a lot of respect in the industry, and if you went that path, people would just assume, oh, I guess you couldn't make it in the big leagues, so you're going to self-publish. That is not really the attitude anymore. I'm happy to say things have changed. I have been in the industry for nearly 20 years. Just in case anyone didn't know, I was the publisher at a small press for 10 years, and I've worked extensively in the industry. I've met many other publishers of various sizes across the United States and Canada and Great Britain, and I've seen the industry from the traditional industry from the inside a lot. I've also done self-publishing, both as an author and as an editor, and I've helped authors along the way, so I know that side of the industry pretty well too. And of course, having worked as an author with, like you said, Sara, with the Big Five in New York, I've seen the lofty heights of that as well. So there's a lot of different options available to authors, and I guess that's the first thing I want to say. It's an exciting time. As an author, you do have different paths, and they're both good. So no, to answer your question again, Sara, if you choose to go traditional or self-publishing, you are not branding yourself one or the other. There is the flexibility these days to go back and forth between the two. So that's great. But gosh, where to begin? I mean, there's so many things to consider when you're debating, should I go traditional or should I go self? Sara, what do you think? What are some of the questions people might be pondering regarding this?
I think the biggest one a lot of people wonder about is cost. How
Hmm.
expensive is
Yeah.
it to self-publish? Because as you and I both know, there are still costs to traditional publishing too that fall on the author.
Hmm.
So can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about budget when it comes to choosing
Yep.
both sides of the table on publishing?
Yeah, that and then that is one of the first questions I usually come across whenever I have this discussion is the money. And there's a saying that is still floating around out there, which is this. It says, money flows to the author. And there are some people who feel that if they, as the author, have to spend any money at all, then they should just run away. And I know why that exists, why that idea exists, because 15, 20 years ago, the only option besides traditional publishing was vanity presses,
I'm
which,
so glad
yes,
you're bringing
asked
on
you, the author.
yes.
Yeah, they asked the author to give a lot of money, and they didn't really promise anything. Well, okay, they promised everything, didn't deliver anything, and it was sort of a red flag that because a lot of the vanity presses would masquerade as real publishing houses, and the red flag was as soon as they asked you for money, this is not legit, run away. 20 years ago, that was the case. A lot has changed since then. The advent of ebooks, the advent of online selling, like through Amazon, etc., and just a change in the awareness of authors as to what self-publishing is and what it can and can't do has made self-publishing legitimate. But as far as the money goes, if you are traditionally published, then yes, you will get paid money by the publisher. Usually it'll happen in an advance, which your agent will negotiate for you, which is a lump sum of money that you get paid up front for the rights for the publisher to sell your book. What that is, it's an advance on royalties, which means as an author in the traditional world, you get 10% of the revenue from the money that they get from selling the book. But you get an advance on that, which means that let's say you get paid $10,000. You get paid the $10,000, and then they will sell the book. And they have to sell enough copies of that book for your 10% to add up to $10,000 before you will see any more money. And as my agent described to me when we negotiated my first deal in New York, he said, my job is to get you the biggest advance I can because most books do not ever pay out their advance. Most books never sell enough copies to give the author ongoing royalty revenue. So he said, my job is to get you the biggest money up front that I can. So, but that's the key with traditional publishing is that yes, you, the author, will get paid something by the publishing house for the right. They're buying the right to publish your book. Depending on the publishing house, if it's a big New York publishing house, yeah, we're probably talking tens of thousands of dollars will be your advance. If you're dealing with a small press, a more local press, it may be $1,000. It may be they'll take you to lunch. Like it really depends on how big the publishing house is, but small presses really are struggling to stay afloat, so they can't afford big advances. The benefit of a small press, though, is that you are more likely as an author to be able to get seen by them. It's much, much harder to get even seen by a big publishing house in New York. So there's pros and cons there. But in general, the money flows to you in traditional publishing, and it flows to you in the form of an advance. And then that's probably it. Now, here's something that people do forget or don't realize with traditional publishing. A traditional publisher is not going to do all the marketing for you. They'll do some, but the website, the author website that we all need, yeah, you got to pay for that.
Right.
Any like Facebook ads you want to do to promote your book, you got to pay for that. Marketing is something that you, the author, are still going to have to chip in for, even traditionally published. And I
And they will,
remember talking. Sorry,
they will
go ahead.
expect, no, I was just going to say, they will
Yeah,
expect you to spend money doing this.
that's right.
It's
It's just part of the deal these days. I remember talking to some long-time authors, probably about 10 years ago. They had been published authors for 30 years at the time. And they were just shaking their heads, going, I can't believe that now I have to put money in. Like, oh, I need a website? Like, what is this? That isn't the way it used to be. It didn't used to be that way. But again, with all the changes we've had in the last 15 years, web presence is essential. And just the way the industry's developed, publishers aren't on the hook to do that for you. You got to do that yourself. So all that to say, if you want to traditionally publish because you want the money to flow to you, that's great. Just remember, some of the money is going to flow away from you for some of the things that you have to do. Now, if you're self-publishing, yeah, you are the captain of this ship. You are the investor in this business. All the money to produce your book and distribute your book and design your book and market your book is coming from you, the author. The benefit, though, is that rather than getting 10% of the royalties, you get 100% of the royalties, which means every time you sell a book, all that money comes to you. Now, you have to pay for printing that book, and you have to pay for the editor and the designer and all the other things, but self-publishing is more like a business case. You say, okay, I'm going to invest this much money into this project, and I need to sell this many copies of the book to break even. Okay, how many copies is that? Do I think I can do it? If you're producing a regular novel, like, a text-based book, they don't cost that much to produce. If you are producing a big, beautiful coffee table book with full color illustrations on the inside, they cost a fortune to produce. So this is the sort of thing that you as an author want to think about. Maybe I don't need all those full color images in my book. Maybe that's something that's nice to have for the special edition I'll do one day. Maybe I should just print the book as it is because it's a lot cheaper. So you do have to think like a business person as a self-published author, and less so when you're a traditionally published author because you have an agent or a publisher looking out for you. But as far as the money goes, yeah, if you have no budget to put towards publishing your book, well, then traditional is the path for you. There are other challenges that come with that, but there is no money laid out at the beginning. If you do have some budget, then self-publishing is a consideration to have for some of the other things we're going to talk about later on. But for money, yes, self-publishing, you put money in up front and hopefully get it back. Traditional publishing, you get some money up front and probably never again, is kind of how it works. So in a nutshell, that's the money.
Thank you. No,
Now,
I think that's
yeah,
really, yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think that that's really good to say because I think people don't realize that part of the pros and cons is that there's the pros and cons exist on both sides. That there's money being spent on both sides. There's, a lot or a little and control and not as much control. And that is something I do hope you touch on a little bit is
Yeah,
traditional versus self and the control you have.
absolutely. That is the next thing I was going to talk about, Sarah. Spot
Okay.
on. Um, While traditional publishing at a glance may seem like the better option, and in some ways it is because of the money, there are other aspects to this. And the big one is its rights and control. And the two kind of go together. When you make a sale to a traditional publisher, you're not selling them your book, you're selling them the right to sell your book in certain territories. And, it depends on the publishing house, but often you'll sell the North American rights to this publisher, but then you'll sell the European rights to another publisher, or maybe it'll just be the United States. Maybe Canada is going to be someone else, right? And is it print and is it ebook? And what about audiobooks? Are you selling the right to your audiobook or are you keeping that, right? So there's lots of rights that you need to worry about as an author. And if you have an agent, your agent will take care of you. But sometimes with a small press, you can deal without an agent. So you may be doing it on your own. Be very careful what you sign when it comes to rights. I mean, sure, they're promising to publish your book, and they will, as a traditional publisher, they will publish it, and you're just so excited to make this deal that you may be willing to sign anything. Oh, they're going to give me $1,000 too. Awesome. Be very careful what you're signing away because there are all kinds of rights that you, as the author, inherently hold to your book that you may be giving away for very little money if you're not careful. The basic rights are the right to sell your book in various different formats. But there's also things like adaptation rights, foreign language rights, movie rights, um, merchandising rights. And some of these may seem silly. Like, oh, come on, my book's never going to have merchandising. Well, maybe not, but maybe it will. And if you've given that away, then you'll be kicking yourself later on. So just be careful. Is all I'm saying is be very careful what you are giving away or what you are selling when you sell your rights. So that's the rights. So just be mindful of that. But when it comes to control, which is Sarah, what you were asking about,
Yeah.
when you make your deal with a traditional publisher, you are giving up a lot of control of your book. You, as the author now, are not going to decide what the cover looks like, for example. If your publisher is nice, they will at least give you a say. You can at least express your opinion, but they don't actually have to because in their mind, this is now their project, which they've invested money in, and they need to make their money back. They know what covers work. And so, as an author, you have to realize that you may not have any control over the cover. You might not even have control over the title. That happened to me with one of my books. I already had a title for it, but they realized, that title's been used before. There's a famous movie that has that title. I know the title works for your book, but we can't use it, so we're going to have to give it a new title. Well, okay. Thankfully, they asked me for my opinion, but there was no discussion as to whether it was going to stay or not. The title
Yeah,
actually changed of the book.
right.
Yeah. And
Yeah, you don't get it.
um,
I don't get to say.
yeah, and when it comes to editing too, now again, as the author traditionally published, you do have some control over what gets edited, but you have to. It's a delicate dance with you and the editor, depending on your relationship with your editor. How senior is your editor? How new are you? Um, as to what they might change. And I think I've told this story before when we talked about editing, but my first book that was published in New York, my editor said, no, your chapters are too long. We got to cut each one in half because we got to keep the pacing. Well, I was outraged, and he was messing up with my book. But you know, ultimately, I had to make the decision: do I want to jeopardize this deal that I've just signed because I've made my editor mad, or am I going to go with what he's saying? Now, in the end, I actually think he was right, and I just didn't have the experience to realize it. So, in that case, it was good. But there are other times where I have not liked the changes that an editor has made. In my very first book, there is something that the main character does in the opening scene, which is different in the final version of the book than it is in the original version of the book, and I do not like that change. But it fundamentally changes who the character is. But I didn't have the guts to say no at the time. It seemed like a very small thing, and maybe readers won't notice it, but I notice it, and it bugs me every time. So be mindful as an author. If you traditionally publish, somebody else is in control now of a lot of different parts of your book, and you have some control, but not as much as you might think. Now, if you self publish, different story. You have complete control. And you ideally will hire an editor to help you and will give you advice, and you will take that editor's advice. But ultimately, you can say, no, sorry, editor, you missed it. You didn't get what I wanted to say. I'm not making that change. I'm doing this. And by the way, as a self published author, if ever you do hire an editor who starts telling you what you have to do, fire that editor. Because that is not an editor's job, is to rewrite your book for you. An editor's job is to bring out your voice more effectively and to help you and give you advice. So little pet peeve of mine. Um, and with that, also with rights and control, the one last thing I want to say here, Sarah, is
Yeah.
flexibility. Self-publishing gives you a lot of flexibility. If you get a cover design, you love it, you launch the book, it doesn't do well, well, maybe it's the cover. You can swap out the cover, no problem. With a self-published book, you just get a new one designed, maybe get some research, get some new ideas, put a new cover on it, boom, new cover. You want to change the title, you can do that too after the fact, after it's been launched. You can do whatever you want. You have a lot of flexibility and all the control. Self-publishing. Traditionally publishing, you do not. You have basically no flexibility because once the book is published, it's done and you cannot change it. And you have far less control. So, yes, you are getting paid money, but what are you giving up for it? And that's the key that I think is the difference between traditionally publishing and self publishing.
Comes down to control.
Yep, yep. And you need to think about it as an author. What kind of person are you? Are you willing to accept that someone else is going to be changing your book? How invested are you in the book? Now, most of us are very invested in our books, but how willing are you to let somebody else tweak it? Maybe tweak it a lot. That is a key question that you need to be honest with yourself. And if you honestly think, nope, I am not in for that, then self publishing might be the way to go for you because then you have full control. Or if you're like, meh, I'm just I know I'm only so good and I can only do so many things. I need people to help me. Traditional publishing might be great for you. Um, so it does come down to that. Everyone talks about the money, but it's really not the money because to self-publish a book doesn't cost that much money. It's not going to cost like $100,000 to do. It depends on your budget and your options, and there are lots of different ways to do it. But let's say your book is a typical length of, say, 75,000 words. You want to hire an editor, you want to hire a cover designer, you want to hire a typesetter, an ebook creator. Put all those together. The editor is the most expensive by far, but you could definitely get a book to market for somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. Again, depending on how long the book is, depending on who you want to hire, what you want to do yourself, etc. But that
And you're
ballpark.
saying doing it with like a professional cover designer, professional interior layouts, things like that. Because you can kind of hack your way into self-publishing a book too with very little expense. I mean, to us, we're more perfectionists with it and we know what quality production of a book looks like. But
Yeah,
I would even bet to say like you could do it for under five if you wanted to.
absolutely. You're absolutely right,
For
Sarah. Yeah. It,
$200
it,
at
it,
most. Like
yep.
if
Yeah, at a bare minimum, you could get your cousin who's a graphic designer to do your cover for you, and you can get your friend who's a teacher to be your editor, and you can pay the $50 to Ingram Spark to get your book put up there. You can do it on a shoestring. Absolutely, you can.
yeah,
Um, and for some books, that's all you need. Sometimes that's all you need. It depends on
right.
what your book is. I just caution you, if you're thinking about self-publishing, is that unless you personally are a graphic artist with design experience with books, you probably want to hire somebody who knows what they're doing to do a book design for you. Because anybody can put images onto a file and make something that looks kind of cool. But there is an art and a science to book cover design. And you want to hire someone who does it for a living and who can actually give you a good looking book cover. I have seen far too many book covers that are clearly self-published. One glance at them, like, oh yeah, self-published, which makes me question the quality. It could be the writing inside is brilliant, but unfortunately, we do judge books by their cover. So you don't want to skimp on that. And likewise with the editing, it depends on what your book is. Maybe it doesn't need any editing at all. You know,
My
I,
books
I
are
do
always
recommend
perfect. I
proofreading.
don't know what you think. I need zero edits.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah,
Kidding.
exactly. Exhibit A is Sarah Dahlman.
No.
Books are perfect. First try. But for most of us, a little bit of editing, even just proofreading, get someone to proofread your book. Trust me, it is so embarrassing to have a book go to print and there's typos in it. Um, you'll probably want to put a little bit of money into it. But you could certainly could do it in the like bottom end under $1,000. You could with some professional help if you want to be really careful with it. But you know if you budget ballpark five, that's a pretty reasonable estimate. And then you have to think how many books do I have to sell to make back that money, and that's when it comes to business case for you. Um, Okay. I have. What about marketing, Sarah? Do you want to talk about marketing here? I know we both hate marketing, but
And
do
we
we
I
want?
mean, I know we've talked about it in the past, but let's maybe just touch on it briefly. Um,
Yeah,
because I do think that that is one of the places where traditionally in self-published uh authors have all the similarities. And you've kind of said that before, but where, everybody has to cover some of these, I don't want to say nominal expenses, but these standard expenses, right? Your website and hosting, you have to put in the time for a social media presence,
yeah,
which is time, and time is money, right? And so I think that that is the biggest surprise for people who, like us, have been on both sides of the street when it comes to publishing, both traditional, self, small. Um, the marketing, and correct me or at least expound on this if you can, but like the marketing is the part where these two paths to publication merge and all
yeah.
authors are on that merry-go-round.
Very much so. Yes. Um, the sales process for the traditional publishing industry is something quite different from the marketing process, and the vast majority of effort goes into the sales process. And I want to explain this. When a publisher signs a book, they edit it, they design the cover, they put it all together, it's ready to go. They will have that book ready to go 6 months before the book launches. Why? Because they have to pitch this book to the bookstores 4 months before launch. And that is a whole industry in and of itself. And as a publisher, I fought my way through that. As a small press, I couldn't even talk to the buyer at Barnes and Noble because I wasn't important enough. I had to go and find a distributor who would then talk to Barnes and Noble. And so I, as a publisher, would have to make the pitch to the distributor, not even to the bookstore, to the distributor and say, okay, here are my 7 books for the season. This is why they're all great. And inevitably they'd say, okay, awesome. Which is the one book that you want me to push? I don't care about the other six. I've only got time for one. Which one? Okay, so I have to pick one. This is our book for the season. Which, as a creator, I hated doing. I hated doing. I hated picking favorites. But the industry required me to pick one. This is the one. And then the distributor would take my books plus the books from the 100 other small presses that they represent, and then they would then curate and say, okay, these are the top picks. I'm going to choose these 20, and I'm going to pitch them to the buyer at Barnes and Noble, which means the other 80 publishers, their one pick isn't even getting shown to the buyer at Barnes and Noble. So that's the process, and that's how books get on shelves, is a sales process to the buyers at the major bookstores. So some books that are traditionally published will never even get onto bookstore shelves. They just won't. They just won't make the cut. And that's really sad, but it is the truth. And so when you are traditionally published, don't think that your book is going to be on the end cap, with 100 copies sitting there for everyone to see. If it even makes it onto shelves, it's probably going to be maybe 2 copies per store, stuffed spine out in the section that your book lives in. And the bookstores have the right to return books if they don't sell well enough. So just because Barnes & Noble bought 1,000 copies of your book doesn't mean 1,000 copies of your book are actually going to stay sold. If the book doesn't do well, then Barnes & Noble might return 800 of them. And then all of a sudden your publisher's stuck with 800 copies of a book that it can't sell, and you've sold 200 copies. And here's the worst part about the traditional publishing sales cycle is that's it. You are done. Your book will never be pitched to the buyers again. Your book was done last month. They've moved on. They've got this month's books to sell. And you've got one shot as a traditionally published author. And if your book doesn't get its shot, you are done. And your book is on the backlist now. Your publisher doesn't care about it. But is your publisher going to give you back your rights? No. No, of course not, because they bought them. And so your book is done. It is done. Whereas with self-publishing, if you launch your book and things don't go well, you have all the flexibility in the world to put a new cover on it, to take it down, to repurpose it, to put it back up again. No one knows. No one cares. They just want to see this book. You can also keep your marketing going and do a relaunch of the book if you want.
Or
But even as a traditional author, and here's the thing.
Yeah.
That's right, anniversary, absolutely, yeah. The traditionally published authors, your publisher still expects you to keep that long tail of marketing going. That is on you. As a publisher, I've got this month's books that I'm pushing, and I may even do some marketing. Like my publishers, my big publishers that I worked with in London and in New York, they did some work for me and the book, and that they got me interviews with big podcasts and with big online websites for science fiction. They did some work for me. They got me connections that I could never have got myself, but they did it for 1 month because that's the month that this book launches. Next month, I am on the backlist. They got something else to worry about now. So I had HarperCollins marketing department's full attention for about 3 weeks. And then I was done because they had something else they had to worry about now. Everything else is now on me. So in that sense, from the marketing side, traditional publishing, self-publishing, it really doesn't matter. It's still on you, the author, to keep that going, to build that following, to do the social media, to keep bringing the book up for people to notice. It's all on you. The publisher is not going to do it. It's not because the publisher is a jerk. It's not because they hate you. It's not because they think of nothing but money. It's just because this is a business. And they have either dozens of books a year if they're a small press, or thousands of books a year if they're a big 5. And you are just one. And they have other things to worry about. And oh yeah, Diana Gabaldon has her newest book coming out now. So they're going to throw thousands of dollars into marketing that because they know that thousands of people are going to buy it. Frankly, Diana doesn't need any help whatsoever. She's doing just fine on her own. And she's a lovely lady, don't get me wrong. But she doesn't need any marketing help. right? It's the authors who are new, who nobody knows about yet. They're the ones who need the help. Okay, I'm starting to rant now. I'm just going to stop and take a drink. Sarah.
This is great though because it's so much. It's chug the wine, chug the wine. Yeah, but the thing is, you lived this for a decade plus, and also you've been on the receiving end of the emotional upheaval that comes from the publishing side, and it's a monster of an industry. It's a big, clunky monster, no matter which way you cut it. Even the self-publishing, it still
Mm-hmm.
requires writers and authors to also put on marketing hats and business hats, which not everybody's cut out to be a business person or a marketer or a PR,
Yeah.
spin doctor. And yet that's the requirement. Um and it's just it's the entertainment industry, cloaked in ink and in paperback books, but it is still the entertainment industry, and I think that's something people don't realize. Um, they think Hollywood is Hollywood and books are separate, but in the end, we're just entertaining and trying to get our voices heard, and
Yeah.
and there's gatekeeping and big, you know, machines of publishing timelines and sales teams and distribution patterns and world events, that can disrupt your chances to be seen. And no matter if you're traditionally published or self-published, and I think in the end what we can walk away from saying is that all of us authors are kind of in the same boat, no matter who's publishing our books.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And it might seem like a big, scary world out there to either traditionally publish or self publish. And if you're feeling that way, we understand. We've been there. Um, and we all choose our paths, and sometimes we choose a couple of paths. I mean, Sarah and I have both self published. We've both been published by small presses, and we've both been published by the big five. So and not in the same order. So we we have the freedom to do what we want to do as authors, and that is one of the best things about today and the market, the publishing landscape, is that you do have the freedom and you
Yeah.
can choose. And if one doesn't work out, you can try the other one. You can self-publish, and if you do reasonably well, that'll get the attention of agents, and then you can go off to New York, or you can do it the other way, and you can be published traditionally first and realize, yeah, I think I'd like more control. Now, you know what? Next time I'm going to do it myself. There's no shame in either path. In fact, there's a lot of fun in both. It's up to you as the author to sort of think about what suits you best. What are you best geared for? What are you willing to take on? And yeah, what is the best path for you?
There it is.
Whew. Okay, Sarah, I think that is our show for the day. I think I'm done.
Yes.
But for everyone who's listening, please don't forget to subscribe to don't miss any of our chats, and feel free to leave a review because it really does help us a lot. And yeah, if you are looking for any help or advice in either self-publishing or getting ready to traditionally publish, I cannot recommend enough our friends at Cascadia Author Services. This is what they do. They are all about helping authors get ready to publish either self or traditionally. And you can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. And you can catch up with Sarah at sarahdahlman.com and on Instagram.
And you can find Ben at bennettrcoles.com, as well as Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again for joining us today on this very in-depth conversation on publishing, both traditionally and self-published. And please reach out if there's any topics or if there's something that we talked about today that you would like us to expand and expound upon in greater detail. Please let us know and we'll cover that. Otherwise, we will see you again next time when we chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.